Welcome to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I am Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And we are extremely excited that you've joined us for another episode of our show where we go through neuroscience and how we can use the information to decode our life. And sometimes we pepper in a little bit of psychology or behavioral science as well. And we've been on the last couple of weeks, Phil, a series, and it's going to continue probably for a little while because I think it's such rich information and people seem to really enjoy it. And it's helpful for us, but we've called it Unstuck My Life or Help Me Through This Change, or maybe you're in the midst of a career or a life transition. How do you move through some of that in the most successful way possible so that you can accomplish or begin to accomplish your defined future state or what your future goals are? So take us, Phil, on a little bit of a recap. Kind of what did we cover in the first two episodes? They were really focused mainly on the future, but ground us there. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do today.
So we started off by talking about an overall how you go through transition, which is got a number of components to it. One of which is, what do you want your future to be? Where are you today? And how are you going to go from where you are today to the future? So those are three different components. And then one of the components we talked about is, let's look into your past and see what's happened there and how it influences you today and moving forward. And then we are going to talk a little bit about the fifth and sixth components, which is, what do you need in the way of resolution to go ahead and actually achieve this change? And what might you need in the way of outside help or learning new things? And so those are the six components. We spent a bit of time, I think, on the future, how you want to design your future. And one of the exercises we took out of that was to identify some pictures of the future and then describe just why those pictures are important to you in the future. So I think I'm sure I've missed a few things there.
No, I think it was great. I think we did several exercises. So I encourage those who are listening, after you complete listening to this episode, if you have a question and say, I really want to know what happened in the future exercises, or I'm really working on trying to define my future, because we're actually moving into the time of year where a lot of people are actually talking about resolutions, which we're going to do an episode on that. So we won't dive into that today. I highly encourage you to listen to episode 23 and 24, because those are the two that are really rich on defining your future state and understanding how to do that with a few exercises. Because today we're actually going to, I believe we're moving into our current state, or maybe a little bit of that in the past. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's mainly rooted in our current state and why that's important to understand where we are today, who we are today, because obviously there is going to present itself as a gap between where we are right now and where we want to go in our desired future. So help us understand, Phil, what the journey is going to look like today and how does it connect to what we've already talked about?
So a couple of things is understanding where you are today and becoming self-aware of where you are today is probably as important a step as any we're going to take. It's fundamental. As somebody famous said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And so finding out what you're doing is really quite important. We've got a dozen or so exercises on how to take a look at that. So I'm just going to run through some of the exercises when I'm working one-on-one with people, some of the exercises. And then what I thought we'd do is dive into one of them. If we have time, we might dive into more than one. So typically, look at what your skill set is. What are the things that you are truly good at? If you go back to the Ikigai discussion that we had about your purpose, one of them is, what do you love doing and what are you good at? So what are those? Go back and take a look at those things, what you're really good at. And that's your skill set. Because one of the things we've found about people who are successful in change is they use their strengths as part of the change process. So if you can understand what your strengths are, what you're good at, and use that as the leverage to experiment and move forward, maybe do some things a little differently, maybe out of your comfort zone or something like that. Right. So understanding who you are is very important, the skill sets. Now, we're not going to go through that because that's very personal, very individual, and you can't really do a checklist of skill sets.
No, I will share if there is anyone who is unfamiliar, or we're not going to plug all these different things we've used, but one that I found we have used quite frequently is Strength Finders 2.0 through Gallup. It's not probably all encompassing in terms of what skills are out there, but it does a pretty good job of helping to root or ground people in I think they've got 34 of them, and there's an assessment that you can take as a part of the book. So if it's something that interests you, highly recommend that. There's no affiliation, by the way. So there's no, you have to say this, Phil, so that people don't think you're trying to sell them on something. We are not trying to sell you on it, but it's a recommended tool that we have used in our coaching practice, both of us. So if it's something that's of interest or you're trying to learn more about your strengths, that's a good place to start.
It is. And that's one of them. If you're in the corporate world or even not, and you've had past assessments, it's always worth going back and pulling those up. Can't mention them all because last time I counted, there was over 2,500 of them. But if you've done any of those behavioral assessments or personality assessments or anything like that, now some of them are bordering on astrology. Be careful. Some of them, there's some by Gallup, there's some by Human Synergistics and people like that, they're actually very well grounded and founded in good psychological practice. But some of them are just a little more dubious than others. Let's just put it that way.
They are. And if you come across any and you're like, hey, I'm curious, is this one that I should, or is it not recommended by your friends here at My BrainWise Coach? You're always free to reach out at questions at My BrainWise Coach, and we'll give you our unfiltered opinion on it.
Yeah. And really what we're looking for is so many of these are written in the same way that as astrology is written, that it triggers off, oh, yes, that just is that. Oh, yes, and that's me, as opposed to something which is scientifically validated. And so those are good. Where you are in different phases of your life. If you're in your 20s or 30s, your interests are probably different than if you're in your 60s or 70s. So that's another thing to look at. There's a variety of those things that are out there. And again, important to recognize. We're not going to delve into that today.
And we call that life's phases, right? That's the activity. So if that's of interest to you, reach out and we'd be happy to share some more detail.
And we can actually do a session. If there's enough interest out there, we can do a session on how can we look at different life's phases. Decade is one way of looking at it, but right. Where you are in terms of what I'll call a career cycle, that's another way of looking at it. Right. So the next thing to look at is your current environment. What else is going on? Because if you've got a lot of other stuff going on, that too will put stress on you. Adding a voluntary change in there as well may not be the right time. So an examination of what else is going on. So if you're having a baby, moving house and changing job, now might not be the time to look at your big, huge personal change. On the other hand, it may be the perfect time. It's just be aware.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting because I think we're all probably different in that aspect. But I know for me, because right now I'm in the midst of a career change. I'm transitioning out and still determining and deciding what's the right fit for me and where I want to go. But adding in a layer of, in terms of having to choose it. Now, if it's forced, it's different. But I don't want to choose any new changes right now. I want to just keep things where they are, get my footing where I'm going to go next. And then, okay, great. If we want to talk about moving, which I don't really want to do that either, but if we had to, fine, or want to do other things in our life, sure. But right now let's just hunker down where we are. Let me get this part situated and then move forward.
Yeah. And as you said right at the beginning of that statement, we're all different.
Right.
And it also, to a large degree, depends whether you feel like you're in control or not. Our brains love to have a sense of prediction and control. And right. If things are ambiguous or out of control, for some people, they don't care. They'll just go with the flow. Other people that don't try and do an additional change. So again, self-awareness is the single most important part. You need to understand what works for you. And so that's what's going on. The other thing is, I think we talked a little bit about the difference between maximizers and sufficers. If you're a maximizer, then you're going to try and get everything right in your thinking about the future, as opposed to if you're a sufficer, you'll go, oh, that's going to be good enough. Again, so understand who you are.
Can you give us a click down, not into activity necessarily, but just define maximizer and sufficer, just in case it's the first time someone's hearing it. how do we, in our context, what are we referring to as maximizers and sufficers?
So if, let's say you're going to go out and buy what I'm going to be doing in the near future, buying a new computer, right? Mm-hmm. We all have an idea. What do we want? We want this out of it. We want this out of it. We want this and so on. One of the things is going to probably be about price. One's going to be all sorts of things, or a car or a washing machine, doesn't matter. The sufficer will look for a number of opportunities. And when they find one that matches everything that they want, they'll just get it. And then they're done because it gives them everything they want. A maximizer will, once they get to there, they'll record that, but then they're going to look for anything which adds more and more value so they can maximize the value they're getting. So they're looking for not just the 5 or 6 main attributes that they were looking for, but they're looking for anything additional that might come along and spend an inordinate amount of time just getting that extra little one, whereas the sufficers moved on. The data is interesting. The data actually says in the short term, the maximizer feels happier. Long term, the sufficer feels happier.
Interesting. And can someone, I'm thinking about it from my own perspective, so I think the answer is yes. But from a perspective of, can I be a maximizer and a sufficer depending on the situation? Because in that description that you just described, I probably, there'll come a point where I'm just going to say, okay, enough is enough, but I'll probably go through and look for the amount that I want to spend. What can I get for it? What's the highest value I can get or the most I can get out of that amount? Whereas if I'm working on a project or something of that nature, I am more of a sufficer. If it's going to accomplish the goal, it's good enough for me.
That's a great question. I've never studied that, whether an omnivisor or whatever it might be. My guess is that we probably land in one way or the other. I would be surprised if somebody is 50-50. You and I have a close friend who's a maximizer in everything. And yeah, 100% is a good way of describing it. And so that tends to bleed through into everything. But we'll make choices, I don't know. Be great to hear from our BrainWise listeners. What's their experience? If anybody wants to throw in an idea about when they are a maximizer and when they are a sufficer. But my experience of people is that we tend to land one way or the other.
I bet that is true. I imagine part of it is there probably is just a small deviation, if I was guessing, based on how much you care about the topic that you're actually that you're invested in. And you still might maximize, but you're not going to maximize to the same degree that maybe it's different levels of maximizing or sufficing based off how much you care about the particular topic. But who knows? I think it's very fascinating as you go through that description. Put it in the comments from our BrainWise friends. Where do you find yourself maximizing, or are you more of a sufficer? And what does that experience look like?
Yeah. So just understanding it again, if you're a maximizer, sometimes back off a little bit in terms of trying to get everything defined correctly before you move forward. If you're a maximizer and a perfectionist, then it can sometimes be very difficult to take even the first step. And then the other thing is, what are the things that you know that you would like to change about yourself? And as we all tend to have one or two of them. Some of them are buried a little deeper than others. But yes, I'd like to have a little more self-control. I'd like to have a little more fill in the blank. And so identify those as well, because if they're coming to your consciousness, they actually mean maybe some of the things you want to focus on. Lots of different parts that. One of the things that I skipped over deliberately is what we call your mental model or your worldview. And that is things that are the way things are in your brain. And I don't mean physically in the brain, but how you interpret the world. And you've built this thing up over, it depends on obviously how old you are. But if you're 18, you've had 18 years plus 9 months in the womb to develop all these concepts in your head. Like I am 75 years old, there's a few more in addition, like a lot more. And some of these things, if we can identify, we go, yeah, that's me, and it's worked for me, and it's going to work for me in the future.
Right.
Some of them we look at and go, yeah, that's worked for me in the past, but that's not going to work in the future. And some of them will look at and go, actually, it's never really worked for me at all. So identifying what they are, and they range from major influences like I was brought up as an only child, or I was brought up in a family of 7 and I was the youngest, or I was brought up highly religious, whatever it might be. Again, take a step back. What are those things? And we'll do a few examples as we go through about some of them.
Go ahead, finish, please.
So one actually happened earlier I guess it's last week now. Those of you who have been following my kitchen saga know that we had to have the brand new refrigerator replaced. And the guy who came in to replace it, lovely man, my height, 6'2" big, strong man. And when I shook his hand, and I've got pretty big hands, my hand got crushed. And I went, wow, powerful grip. And he said, yep, that's what my daddy taught me when I was 5, and I've lived by that ever since. There's a mental model, right? And that is that to whatever the reasoning is behind it, presumably to show your masculinity or to show you how powerful you are or whatever it might be, then you've got to grip somebody's hand strongly. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad idea. It's a mental model that gentleman held.
Right.
There's lots and lots of others, and we'll talk about those as we go through.
Yeah. And I think another way to describe it is shadow beliefs, is what another group calls them. And these are probably some that you may know them. They live on the surface. And we've talked a little bit about this from a life story perspective, but they are things that live underneath the surface that you may not be aware of that are driving behavior. And it's beliefs about ourselves, typically, and that have been influenced. And so those things influence our life. Like I've told everyone, one of mine was, I have to be the best. And that can both serve me well up until a point, but also does not serve me well. And we can go through that a little bit if it's of interest to talk about those shadow beliefs and how do you identify them? Because I think it's just another adjacent type of worldview that is about our beliefs we hold about ourselves that then end up driving our behavior.
And in fact, I won't mention any names. A conversation I had this week was somebody who was basically, she was in relationship and the relationship was not going well. And in fact, he finished up moving out for a period of time. She described her growing up. Her mother had, when they got home from school at 5 o'clock, then you had to do this, you had to do this, you had to put your shoes away, you had to do this, then you had to do this, then you did, and then you did it. And everything was organized and rigid every day. Maybe you got to watch TV for 10 minutes. And she said, I realized that was what I was doing to my kids and to my partner. He said, clearly it wasn't working. I liked the relationship. He was a good man. And so she said, what of those things do I really need to keep going? And what can I let go of? So first of all, admiration that she had self-awareness to do that. And the second admiration that she said, yeah, which of those are going to be important to me? And some of them she didn't want to let go of, but could reach a compromise. And so that's just a really good example of understanding what your worldview is.
That's fabulous. Good for her.
Yeah. So very impressed with her. Should I give a couple more examples?
Yeah, let's keep going.
So this is a friend of mine, and I actually finished up learning a lot about worldviews from her. And one of them, we did a workshop together, and we led a workshop together. Probably, I think it was about 50 managers that we took through a one-day workshop. I think it was on a Wednesday. So the following day, I got a phone call from her and said, I'd like to meet with you on Monday. Are you available for lunch? I'd like to talk about the workshop. What went through my mind?
That you were in trouble or something went wrong?
Yeah. And so all weekend I thought it had gone really well. And so Monday lunch, I sat down and I went, okay, so what did I do? And she said, what do you mean? I said, obviously something's up. And she says, no, nothing's up. I just want to talk about what went well and how we can use those things to do something better in the future. What was my mental model And that my mental model was I must have screwed up in some way.
Right.
And I'm going to get for many people out there. It says to you, I'd like to talk, I'd like to have a conversation, I'd like to, whatever it might be. We jump to that mental model. And
yeah.
it
And the
might
thing
be
I always encourage people to do, especially when I'm working with new leaders, is if you say, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about X, if it's a positive conversation, lead in with that and say, I want to talk about how well it went, or I want to debrief, how that way you're setting the person up and they have an expectation of what the conversation is going to look like. Now, if you're going to do the opposite and it's more of we're going to go through some opportunities, then you might need to have a little bit more dialogue and say, hey, nothing's wrong, but come prepared because I'd like to talk about X, Y, and Z related to this. I just want you to be able to have some time to really think on it, but set expectations on the front end so that people aren't sitting there wondering the whole time.
Yeah. And the more you can identify those as they come through, the easier it is to go, yeah, is this one working for me or not? And
identifying your mental models, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. And this same lady was describing an event where she and a friend of hers walked into a restaurant for lunch, and there was a huge sandwich bar. And so this lady went to walk around the sandwich bar and bumped into her friend. And I said, you're walking around the sandwich bar the wrong way.
Oh, yeah, we talked about this because I think we called it the salad bar lady.
That's right, the salad bar lady. And that's there's no rules about which way you walk around a salad bar. Now, I bet we're going to have some of our BrainWise listeners go, oh, yes, there are. If you go into Sizzler, you're going to go to the right around the salad bar. There's nothing. Right. There's nothing magic that says which way you've got to go. We all have a mental model.
We do. It's interesting. I learned one last night. My husband and I went to a concert yesterday evening, and we got on the elevator. I think this lady must have been a therapist or a psychologist or something by trade or by profession, because she was talking to her friends and she said, did you know we did a experiment. When you get on the elevator, you're going to walk in face first and you're having a delightful conversation. But there's this unspoken rule that when you get in the elevator, you turn around and you face forward and you don't talk.
Yeah.
Because if you turn around and you're continuing to talk, it's awkward, socially awkward. So that was a mental model for her because I got thinking about it. I'm like, I keep talking on the elevator, but I do turn around and face forward, but I keep talking. And sometimes I think my husband looks at me and he's probably thinking in his mind, why the heck are you still talking? It's not a mental model of mine, but it worked for everyone else because now I will say turning around, if everyone's facing one direction and you're in the elevator and you turn and you face them, now that is awkward. And that's a mental model I have. But anyway, so it can be as small and trivial to some degree as that one was. It may not be trivial for some, but for me, it was like, oh, that's interesting. But it's a mental model that we have or that people have.
Yeah. And our lives are built of hundreds, if not thousands of these. And one of the things that I love doing is finding out what causes them. I have a mental model in my head.
On your foot, Phil?
No, I don't think so. Maybe I've got a brain down there, but it's
toe.
Yeah. And so I know I was driving along the other day and I looked over at the car next to me and the guy was driving with a hat on. And I have a mental model that basically says, if you're driving with a hat on, you must be stupid. Yeah.
Right, because you can't see as well if you've got a hat on. It obstructs your view.
And so therefore, it would probably obstruct your view. It's probably difficult to get in and out of the car and blah, blah. There's a whole series of justifications why I think that way. I certainly found myself thinking that way. And I went, he's probably one of the smartest guys on the planet. Who knows? But my mental model had already made my mind up. And that's why I backed off of let him go ahead, because after all, I'd rather be behind him than him behind me. I've made this whole story up about his hat.
I was taught that when I don't even wear hats, but that when you go into a building, you take your hat off. You don't wear your hat into the building, and especially in church. But then even we'd be walking around Walmart and it was a sign of respect. That if you have your hat on in a building, you're being disrespectful. And I don't know, I guess it's probably not right or wrong. It's just what works for you. I do think if you're sitting in like an auditorium style, you need to take your hat off because especially if people can't see past it. But it's interesting because then in some other cultures, they actually wear hats to church on Sundays, whereas so it's fascinating that there's so many differences, but that is one of them. That if you wear your hat into a public building, then you're being disrespectful.
Absolutely. And again, this one's out of personal experience. When I first moved to America and I went into a relatively high-end restaurant and people are wearing baseball caps.
Right.
And that shocked me because when I grew up, that would never have happened in a restaurant. So again, we've drifted into what are the cultural the mental models come from. I was talking to a lady from Belarus, I think it was, and she said she was very surprised when she came over here and someone gave her a dozen roses. She said, never give a dozen roses. You would give 11 or 13, not a dozen.
Weird.
So mental models that we carry with us are very different. When I lived in Belgium, I apologize if I offend anybody who's Belgian or lived in Belgium, but at this time of the year, in November and December, there's not a lot of beautiful wildflowers. It's great. And then in the grocery stores, all of a sudden at the end of October, all these appear. They were huge, 6 or 7 inches across. My girlfriend and I at the time said, let's buy a dozen of them and put them all around the house, which is what we did. Beautiful. Our housekeeper arrived the following Monday and just started to chuckle. And I remember her name. I said, so Alice, what's going on? And she said, I've never seen inside a Belgian person's home. There's only one reason you buy them, and that's to put them on people's graves. I guess it's...
So my question is, the grocery store getting them around that time of year because more people are dying in October?
No, there's maybe, I don't know.
Because it sounded like there was an influx of them into the grocery store, and if they only use them for funerals, then apparently people must be dying more frequently at the end of the year.
No, I think there's the Day of the Dead, I think they call it in Mexico. I think it's like November the 3rd or somewhere around there.
Right.
And so it's a religious ceremony. The people demand graves. And so that evening, we were going to dinner with a couple of friends at their house. And we had in mind that we would take a couple of these daffodils with us.
The chrysanthemums,
the chrysanthemums with us. And so we mentioned it when we got there, and they said, we would have understood, but your housekeeper is absolutely right. So mental models are everywhere, and just have fun with your own and finding out what it is that's important, that's driving you, and whether it's still useful to you or not.
Exactly. Because some are and some aren't, and that's an entirely personal choice, right? We're not going to advocate one way or another. There are some probably fairly universal ones that we know, okay, that's probably not going to serve me well as I move forward. But it's a great discovery, because what you'll find is, especially if it's something that you weren't aware of before, those shadow beliefs that we talked about, which that can, if you go back a few episodes, you'll hear how to do that. But essentially, the summarized version is, over different parts of your life, different periods, you ask yourself some very similar questions. What were my biggest lessons out of that time? Who are my biggest family and friend influences? What was my role and my family's role in the household? And so you ask yourself that series of questions about each phase of your life, what you can remember, going all the way back to toddler years, which is probably much less in that time that you'll be able to recall consciously. But you then identify, after doing that, all of your themes. And the themes end up telling you what your shadow beliefs are. Some you'll probably know, some you won't. But what's fascinating is, once you identify them, you can then begin to see them show up in your behavior. And you can see, is it serving me well anymore, or is it not? And how do you then we call it, in that particular exercise, it's reframing it. So that way the mental model is probably never going to go away. It's going to always be there to some degree, but how can you reframe it so that it influences your behavior in a more positive direction at this phase of your life?
And for those people who are getting adept at using AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or whatever, there's dozens of them now. It's actually a useful tool. But if you can use that and start describing some of those things, you record them as you're talking, get it into text, and then go, what are the themes? You can get AI to help you out with that in 20 seconds.
It's
So
great. I've used it actually with several of my clients or coaching engagements I've had over the last number of years. I use it to summarize the story. I use it to, because there's things you do as a part of it. But then I've also used it to help identify themes, whether it's in life story or if it's in other things. What are the themes that are coming through?
yeah. So there's a very practical, and just record it 20 seconds. You're not disengaging from the process. You'll just help go more quickly.
And it'll probably identify things that you weren't even aware were there, because sometimes it can be hard to see what those themes are.
And so that's mental models, I think, are probably one of the most important, or the worldview. Where they come from is all over the place, from your parental influence, religious influence, societal influence,
Right.
even to the point where, what are the proverbs that drove you? Think of he who hesitates is lost, or look before you leap. Which one is more driving you as an individual?
Right.
Who are driven by the need for high prediction are probably going to do look before you leap.
Oh, totally. That's
Right?
what I'm doing. I'm not going to spend a ton of time there, but I'm going to glance over the cliff to make sure that there's at least a net down there in case I don't make it. Otherwise, I might back off.
Yeah. And again, all of those proverbs that we've been taught, most of them come out in opposites. So here's a proverb and there's the anti-proverb, or whatever it's called.
Right.
And again, which ones drive you? Those are going to be part of your mental model picture. Where were you in the family? You were number two. There's a lot of prediction about what goes on in the second down in a family.
Right.
By the way, I'm one of them. So
I'm the older, so.
So this number two tends to do the opposite of number one.
Oh yeah, my brother is definitely the opposite of me.
Yeah, and it's not always the case, but again, understanding it. I was coaching a lady 6 or 7 years ago, and her driver was that she was the eldest of 4 daughters, and therefore she had to be the role model. She had to get straight A's. She had to be home on time. She had all these rules that she was driving her life by, until she turned around and said, I don't want to do that anymore.
I love him. I think it's great. I think it's a great exercise for people, especially when we talk about, because it could be, we go to the theme of the series, Phil, which is unstucking my life or whatever we're calling it. It still is, the name is circulating, but the mental models or worldviews can be a big part of what is keeping you stuck.
Yes.
Because you believe something about yourself, or there's something that is, and I know this can be a controversial, there's nothing that is a shadow belief that's driving my behavior. It is. It's just a known fact that it's happening. And that in and of itself is probably a non-conscious belief of ourselves when we have that kind of defensiveness around it. But take a moment to just step back, and especially if you're trying to accomplish something, or maybe it's not even accomplish something. Maybe it's you just want your life to look different than where you are right now. It could be as simple as that. Then most likely there's something that we are doing, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, that's keeping us where we are from going to where we would like to go, or having our life look like what we would like it to look in the future. And so it is worth the moment to pause and say, okay, how am I going to move forward in this?
One way of doing it as well, I'm going to take a different slice completely now. And it's what I call my motivation matrix. And so if you were to draw a 4x4 matrix, and across the top, it's how you feel about a certain aspect. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Anywhere from I loathe it, I tolerate it, I like it, I love it. Those are feelings about. And then on the left-hand side, what's your competence level on a particular topic? From I know nothing about it, to I've got some knowledge, to I'm pretty good at it, to I've got mastery of this subject, or I'm an expert. So 4 layers there on 4 topics. And then take the work environment to start with. Take any activity that you're doing as part of your job, put it in one of those cells, right? Do you love it and you're really good at it? Or are you really good at it, but you've done it so many times, you're actually hating it? So it might be if you're a manager coaching people, you might turn around and say, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. I'm not perfect. I've got fairly good knowledge about it, and I love doing it. As opposed to writing a progress report at the end of every month or end of every week. Yeah, I'm pretty good at it, but it's a waste of time. I hate doing it. And what you're looking for is, once you identify these things, now how much of your time do you actually spend doing these things?
Right.
And if you spend more than 50% of your time that's on the left-hand side of that matrix, probably driving you nuts.
Right. Which the left-hand side, just for those who are able to visualize it, are those tasks that you are not as good at or you don't enjoy doing as much.
You don't enjoy, you either dislike, you're tolerating it or loathing it. Now, whether you are good at it or bad at it, it's still driving you crazy. And the other thing is, if you don't have anything in the what I'll call the bottom right corner, which is things that you like and love doing, but you aren't very good at, those are your learning opportunities.
Right.
Those are things that you might want to consider adding into your future.
No, I think it's great because it can help identify things that will help motivate you as you move forward by removing some things if possible and adding in new things or doing more of things that you really enjoy and are both good at or wanting to learn.
Yeah. And you can do, as a manager at work, you can do it for yourself. You can do it with working with your staff. Then if you've got anybody with 50% or more on the left-hand side, you're in danger of losing them. And certainly they won't be engaged in the work.
Absolutely. And I think even at home, in terms of how you're divvying up the housework, not always is there going to be one person in your spousal relationship that's going to love doing a particular, let's just say laundry. Both may not like it, but maybe you like it you like it more, you can tolerate it over someone else. And then there's another activity that you just can't stand doing, and they can tolerate it over doing the laundry. But you're actually doing it in the opposite. You're doing the one that you don't really like, and they're also doing the one that they don't really like. But if you just switched simply, you might actually have a little bit better experience. So it's worth doing the exercise to identify. And then unfortunately in the home, there's going to be things that none of us like doing and it has to be done regardless. But there are some that probably can be swapped in terms of what are my household responsibilities that might help motivate you a little bit more.
And there's a really good example, and I don't think Kathy's going to get upset of me talking that. Kathy is my wife, for those people who don't know. But Kathy hates weeding. I actually love weeding. It's for me, it's a mental relaxation. It's almost like meditation. But when she grew up, they had to go and weed by way of punishment. That mental model is if she thinks about weeding, it means she's being punished. And that's been around for a long, long while.
So you do the weeding and she doesn't.
Yeah. So it's very easy. But again, a difference between there's where motivation and mental models start to come into the same place.
It's interesting because when we were growing up, we had a very large garden, huge, massive thing. And we had to go out during the summer. There were three of us. We all had to grab our little hoe, the long stick with it looks like this flat end where you're hoeing up weeds out of the ground. And for 30 or 40 minutes, at least 3 times a week, we had to go out and hoe weeds. Oh, I hated it. And it wasn't punishment. It was just, first of all, every Saturday, my mom listens to it, so I love you very much, Mom. And I actually have learned from her a lot of things, but we would have a chore list every single Saturday morning, which was a great thing. It helped with responsibility and all this. But as young people, you wake up and go, oh, I just want to do nothing on Saturday. And then you wake up and you have this long list of chores to do. But one of them was hoeing the garden. Oh my gosh, I hated it so much. I did not enjoy it because it's not my thing. Now, I like to flower garden. And so typically the way Joey and I probably haven't actually, maybe I've sheared it, but I usually do some of the flower barrels in the front and I like to put them together and I'll water them and all of that. And then Joey usually does our garden that's in that traditional garden. Like right now, I think he's growing collard greens, or I think this summer he had flowers and tomatoes and some cucumbers. He typically takes care of that more. And we haven't really talked about it, but it's probably because of that mental model for myself, where I'm just like, I don't really want to do that type of gardening because I remember doing it for hours. And my mom's going to say that was an over exaggeration, but that's what it felt like.
Who cares about what the truth really was?
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, so mental models are a key to deciding what you want moving into the future. And tying this back is once you have identified the mental models, then if they work for you, great, keep them. If they are dubious or they don't work for you, what do you want to do to put them in change slightly for?
And I think, Phil, veering to slightly different exercise or activity for helping us identify our courage state, and it can also probably help in identifying mental models if someone's having a challenge coming up with it, is if you're in the space where you're open to feedback, ask some questions of those that are in your inner circle. And one of the exercises we do a lot of times when coaching someone or in a conversation experience with someone, whatever you want to call it, or facilitating dialogue, is we'll do what we call a 360, traditional 360, where there's questions that we ask to every person, and then that helps us identify themes. If you're in your own individual experience, there are some questions you can ask others. How am I showing up well for you? Or where can I improve in how I show up? Or a variety of other questions that you can ask, but then identify. And obviously, one of the things that's most important is don't ask these questions if you're then going to defend the responses that you get back from the other person, because then it just totally is not going to be helpful for you. And it's okay if you're not at that space. There may be some things you need to work through before you're able to ask others those questions. But then when you are in a place, ask those questions, simply listen to the response, record it, write it down, and then thank them for the feedback. And obviously, I'd synthesize the information, whether it's using AI, like we had shared, or identifying the themes for yourself. But it can help you confirm some of the things you already know, and it might illuminate some things that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah, great ideas. All of these things. And again, we're doing this in pursuit of the change or the future that we want. And
Right.
so whatever you learn out of it, double back. Now, what do I want? How do I want to encode that for my future?
In addition, when you're asking for feedback, a way to help frame feedback so that you don't become as defensive, I've always referred to it as a gift. And there are 3 things that you can do with said gift. I can receive the gift, use it and apply it. Whatever I want, I'm going to use it, right? I'm actually going to use the information that's being given. The second thing you can do with a gift is you can put it on the shelf in the closet and never think about it again. The third is, I'm going to get this gift and now I'm going to re-gift it. So you have it on the shelf and you decide later, I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to re-gift it back to somebody else. And so I think what that does is it helps if you think about feedback in that way. And obviously, when you approach a conversation, you want to approach it in the most positive direction possible. You're going to most likely try to use most of it, or at least in my case, I do. There may be a couple of things that, I'm not going to be able to do anything that with. And so what it does is help to remove some defensiveness, because you know that I don't have to use everything that comes back from people when I ask for feedback. But if I'm really intentfully listening, and if multiple people say the same thing, it's probably one that you're going to want to use versus put on the shelf.
When I first got to America, and he said, look, if somebody tells you, ignore them. He said, if a second person tells you, listen to them. A third person tells you, go into town and buy yourself a saddle.
I think we're going to leave it in the podcast because that's hilarious. Exactly. If multiple people are saying it, it's probably true.
Yeah. Let's at least pay attention.
So Phil, we're going to go and we're going to talk about our BrainWise moments. And before we do that, let's summarize kind of the conversation that we've talked about today, because we've spent probably a good chunk of time talking about worldview and mental model with intention, because it's probably one of the largest drivers of our current state and what is and is not happening from our desires or goals perspective. But how does what we talk about today help me unstuck my life?
Because it is quite likely that one of the reasons you're stuck is around one of those mental models. Mm-hmm. Now, in the shifting things over, turning the stones over, looking underneath, you may not find the one that's causing you to be stuck, but there's a good chance that if you're stuck on something, your non-conscious brain is going to drive you to the one that's important that you take a look at. And take a look at it and make a decision. More often than not, those mental models are going to help you, but Those things, I think it was Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there. And
Totally.
so some of the things that have worked for you in the past when you were 20 or 30 years old might not work when you're 40 or 50.
Right. 100%. And I think if you think about what we've talked about today, we've given everyone, our BrainWise friends, several exercises or several things that they can do. Identify your strengths, identify what motivates you, identify what are the things, your current situation, your life's phases, what phase of life are you in, and then mental models, specifically, what are your mental models, worldview, shadow beliefs, and all of that tells a story of where you are today. Because then what ultimately it's going to do is we always start with our future. And in the last couple of episodes, we've talked about how do I define a rich future for ourselves. And if you think about it, your future is on the right side of the paper and your current state is on the left side of the paper, meaning that where I'm at today to where I want to go tomorrow, there's a gap in between where I'm at today and where I want to go tomorrow. And so that's what this conversation has been about, is where am I at today so that I can identify what is the gap between where I'm at today and where I want to go tomorrow. And then obviously we'll talk about how do you get there. But Phil, before we wrap up and give any kind of reflection, what were your brainwise or unwise moments from the week? Because we've had a really rich discussion today on our current state. And I think we're at the point where we can wish our brainwise friends well until we get to our next episode.
Mine is a change happened to me fairly recently, and that is I'm a part owner of a restaurant and distillery, and I backed away for the last 18 months. And I've now been persuaded to go back in and be the CEO for the coming year. And because I'd backed away for a long while, I wasn't familiar with some of the situations that were going on at the moment. And I've done this many times before, and let's go in and ask 3 questions. What's working, what's not working, and what advice do you have? Now, it means asking the questions, listening, making notes. I always make notes, and then doing something about it. I had 6 conversations this week, each one of which was a phenomenal conversation. And I learned so much about what's going on. But one of the things I learned was how many ideas people have that are not just the managers of the organization, but one layer down. In Valley, we call it skip level interviewing. You find out what's going on, not just from the regular people you talk with, but a layer lower.
I love it.
So that was and it was brainwise because number one, I elected to do it. And number 2 is phenomenal outcomes. They were all ladies that I interviewed. And if any of you listen, then I thank you. That was a great opportunity.
I love it. That's awesome. I've done something similar in my experience. I didn't probably call it that. I would go and ask people for feedback so that we could improve the programs or the activities or the functions that myself and my team were responsible for. So my brainwise moment from the week was we decided to purchase a new TV because I have struggled with eyesight and I wear contacts and glasses. Our primary bedroom is huge, which we're very blessed with, but it's massive. We had a smaller TV in there, and so it was at the far end of the room, and I couldn't read it. I would always have to ask my husband, what does that say? I can't read this. We watched the Golden Girls when we go to sleep at night, and I could only ever remember it was that one because it had the pink picture. So anyways, we decided to get a different one so that way I could read it. So anyways, we got it to the house, and I decided to try to install it on the wall myself. I'm not a handy person by any stretch of the imagination. I watched a video, and then I marked all the things. I knew where I was going to put it. Come to realize as I was drilling the first hole into the stud, we didn't have the right material, right equipment, drill bit, I think in this case, to be able to really get in, pierce the stud. So that way we'd be able to put the screw in. And it says, don't use a drill to put the screw in. You're supposed to use a socket wrench, I think is what it said. And I don't have enough hand strength to do that. And we didn't have the socket wrench that you click. It was a different kind. So anyways, I made the decision after doing it for an hour, stop before you have 500 holes in the wall and you've made a big mess of everything. Get on TaskRabbit, find someone in the area to come and install it. And I'm so glad that I did because he was here. He came that afternoon. It took him 20 minutes. He was in and out, boom, done. And the TV looks fabulous. And celebration, I can read it. So, Thank God. I am so thrilled. I can finally read. And I'm sure my husband is rolling his eyes when he listens to this and goes, yeah, I'm happy too. I don't have to ask him questions anymore. When I have my glasses and my contacts in, I'm good. I can read it.
And so the lesson there is?
The lesson is challenge yourself up into a point, but don't, when you start to know you're going to get frustrated, don't keep going if it's going to be too much of a challenge. And that's what I recognized is it was going to be too much of a challenge to try to save $54 to pay someone to come do it for me, because it's just not a skill I have and we didn't have the right tools anyways. Just give it up. Let someone else come and do it. I tried though. So that was a BrainWise moment. I'm stretching myself, but I also knew in the moment, don't do any more.
So one of the things we've learned about your future is making a living as a handyman is not part of your future.
No, it sure is not at all. I feel like I have other things that I can do, and I can help keep people employed by paying them to come be handy around the house.
There we go.
It's not for me. There are some things that we can do that are simple, and Joey and I do some of those, but yeah, no. And if it requires a ladder of any kind, count me all the way out. I'm too much on my feet. We just hung Christmas lights outside, and thankfully my husband is a very good sport and does it for me. He gets on the ladder because otherwise I just wouldn't do it. I can't do ladders. I can do a step ladder, maybe 2 rungs up on a step ladder, but ladders after that, absolutely not. Nope. So, anywho.
All right.
It's very good. It's been a great episode. I think we are on this series and we're not done yet. If you think of the transition map, Phil, there's several parts we have yet to talk about, which is past/recent past, pathway to get from our current state to our future. And then obviously we'll talk a little bit about the resolve and external support needed to help us accomplish it. So we've got a few more conversations to have as we go along this journey, but hopefully our BrainWise friends have learned something or they've found an activity that they think might enrich their understanding of their current state. So that's our reflection for you this week is if you look back on the things that we've talked about today on our episode, of those activities or of those exercises, which 1 or 2 most called to you or you find the most intriguing, sit down and actually go through it. And if you have any questions, of course, reach out at questions@mybrainwisecoach.com. We'd love to answer them. And always, if you're enjoying this podcast or enjoying our series, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this podcast and review it with your friends and family so that they too can go on this journey of becoming more brainwise in how we live our lives. So until next week, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay brainwise.
Stay brainwise.